Hello, everyone, and welcome to our December 10th edition of the Clinical Research Forum. Today, we have one of those that's everybody's favorite, where we have a researcher and a clinical trials participant, both talking about the same study from their different perspectives. So our participants today are Dr. Ellen Hartenbach, who's the chair of the UW Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, and Judi Trampf, who's a clinical trial participant who participated in a trial for which Dr. Ellen Hartenbach was the PI. So this is going to be a great session, and we're really excited to hear what they have to say. Just a couple of notes. If you have questions or thoughts that you would like to share with our speakers, if you can please place them in the chat, we'll make sure to get those questions answered for you when we have a moment. Also, we're recording this session, and as you know, we will put it on our YouTube web channel. And so you can watch it at another time, or if there are pieces that you heard that you want to re-listen to, that will be available as well. We are going to have Ellen present some of her information about the trial. I'll give you a little bit of an overview before we hand it off to Judi, and Judi will share some of her experiences, and we'll follow up with some questions for both of them. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Ellen Hartenbach. Ellen, take it away.
Okay, thank you so much, Betsy and Kevin and Sarah. It's just my pleasure to be able to, participate in a session like this, because I've been involved with clinical trials for many, many years, and being able to bring clinical trials to patients that are helpful for them is just one of the great rewards of my career. As Betsy mentioned, I am the chair of obstetrics and gynecology. My capacity here really is in my role as a gynecologic oncologist. So I'm a specialist in taking care of patients with women with pelvic cancer. So mainly uterine cancer, ovarian cancer, cervical cancer. And it's in that capacity that I greet you today. And I also am the co-director of our GYN cancer clinical trial, what we call DOT, which is the disease-oriented team at the Carbone Cancer Center. So again, thanks to everybody who's joining. Our Clinical Trial Institute is just doing a great job of helping people to understand more about clinical trials. Again, I'm Ellen Hartenbach, and I'm joined by Judi Trampf, who is an amazing person and an amazing cancer survivor. So I'm going to give you sort of the technical, and then Judi's going to really tell you the perspective of somebody that participated in one of our clinical trials for cancer at Carbone. So now I'm going to hope that my slide advances, and I'm going to wonder why the technology is not favoring me today. When I hit enter, it doesn't.
It went.
Oh, it went. Okay, perfect. Okay, so there we go. This is what I need. Okay, so my why. Like, why did I choose to become a cancer physician, and why contribute to clinical research? I did an obstetrics and gynecology residency in the late 80s, early 90s. And I loved obstetrics, but I was also drawn to the gynecology side of things, and particularly to complicated problems and situations where women are just really facing difficult decisions, difficult problems. And I was also really drawn to taking care of adult patients and older patients. And so GYN oncology and the cancer care for gynecologic cancers is what really got my attention. So I went on to additional training and got a fellowship in gynecologic oncology. And where I trained, we were very involved with cancer clinical trials. And cancer clinical trials are our way of advancing the field. So the survival for patients with cancer is sometimes remarkable, and sometimes really not anywhere near what we want. These can be devastating illnesses. So getting to be involved with cancer clinical trials, where while I'm providing care for people, I'm also discovering what might provide better care over time, was something I got really interested in early on. And that interest has just stayed. So I've been involved in cancer clinical trials now for over 30 years. And along with the resilience of my patients and the hope that we can have better outcomes, that's what really keeps me engaged and interested, and why I continue to be somebody who participates in clinical research. On the whole, we find that patients with cancer who participate in clinical trials actually have better outcomes when you look on the whole. So that's my why. So let's talk a little bit about why somebody would choose a clinical trial. The idea is to gain access to treatments that you might not otherwise have access to. It's also to help us learn about new treatments. And some of my patients have been very altruistic, and they want to jump on a trial because they know someone coming after them is going to have a difficult disease, and they want to contribute to someone who they hope might have better outcome than they had during their time with cancer. And so those are some of the whys for patients. About clinical trials, there are 4 phases of clinical trials. So phase 1 trials are those trials where the new approach, whether it's a drug, a targeted therapy, even some kind of other intervention, radiation treatment or surgery. The phase 1 trial this is the first time we're doing this in humans, and it's usually an investigational drug. But the bottom line is it's been researched for years prior to that time. But a phase 1 trial is very controlled situation to see how is this going to go for a person, and how are they going to do when they get something that hasn't been given to people before. But it's in very controlled situations. Phase 2 is, hey, we've got some evidence that this works well in this particular cancer. Let's test it in gyne cancer, uterine cancer, colon cancer, lung cancer, and let's see in a particular situation how people will do. By the time you get to a phase 3 trial, you're talking about something that has been in development for years, if not decades, and we really think it's going to be as good or better than the current standard of care. So Judi's trial is a phase 3 trial. I personally am most involved with phase 2 and phase 3 trials. Phase 4 is that phase of clinical research where, hey, we've already figured out that this is approved, but we need to monitor and see how things go for people who are on this trial, on this particular drug. So again, Judi's is a phase 3 trial. So a little bit more about Judi's trial. This is a trial for patients who have either a new diagnosis of uterine cancer or have a uterine cancer recurrence. And the standard treatment in this situation, when Judi came to us, was a combination of 2 chemotherapy drugs, carboplatin and Taxol. And that has effectiveness about half the time. Half is good if you're a cup half full person, half is just not so good if you're a cup half empty, and half the time's never good enough for a cancer physician to tell a patient. So this particular trial was looking at adding new drugs to the carboplatin Taxol regimen to see if we could get more effectiveness. And in terms of the details, this is a little bit of a busy slide, but in a typical cancer trial, we have a slide like this that just tells everybody these are the different arms of the trial. We rarely do a trial in cancer where some people get a treatment and some people don't get any treatment. It's much more common to have various types of treatments in each arm of the trial. So in this particular case, the arm A is the standard carboplatin and Taxol. And you can see on the left-hand side of the slide, there are very specific what we call eligibility criteria. So you have to have a particular advanced cancer, you have to have a particular type of cancer, and all those kinds of details where Judi fit that, right? So the arm A is going to be the standard of care treatment, carboplatin and Taxol. The arm B is going to be carboplatin and Taxol plus a drug called durvalumab. And durvalumab is an immunotherapy drug And there is a lot of evidence that immunotherapy might be a game changer in uterine cancer, but we didn't know that 5 years ago. The third arm of the trial is carboplatin plus durvalumab plus a drug called olaparib, which is a PARP inhibitor. So, you know, when we were talking to patients about getting on this trial, they could either get randomized to arm A, arm B, or arm C, but they basically had a 2 out of 3 chance that they would get immunotherapy in addition to the standard chemotherapy. So the standard chemotherapy, you know, as I said, you know, works about half the time. But we really thought that people would do better with these additional treatments based on other studies that led up to this phase 3 study. So, and the answer is it worked. So it's not often that I get to sit with a patient and show them some of the published results of the trial. So we opened this trial in the early 2000s, right in the middle of the pandemic. And it was open at our center and nationally and across the world for 2 full years during the pandemic. So the cancer did not wait for the pandemic. We kept our offices open. We kept our clinical trials office open as best we could. It got bumped a little by vaccine trials and slowed down, but we were still on it. So this trial accrued, meaning we were able to enroll people on this trial pretty successfully over 2 years. And that's considered a pretty quick window for enrollment on a trial of this size. So without getting too technical again, on the far left of the screen, you're going to see these survival curves. So a survival curve is our way of saying, you know, what proportion of these patients with these treatments live this length of time. And this trial endpoint was what we call progression-free survival. So if you're surviving your cancer and it's not progressing, that's a good thing. And what you can see, without getting too technical, that top graph, you know, the people who got the 4-drug combination have the best odds of survival. So that blue line. The people who got the 3-drug combination are on the green line, and the people that, you know, 5 years ago we would have always just given carboplatin and Taxol to have the survival on the red line. So what happened in Judy's case is she was able to get on treatment that she wouldn't have gotten on otherwise. Now, do we know exactly what Judy's been getting? She and I have talked about this a little bit. We knew that anybody that enrolled in the trial had a 2 out of 3 chance that they were getting the immunotherapy, and they had a 1 out of 3 chance that in addition to the immunotherapy, they'd get the PARP inhibitor. So the early published results of this trial show that the people who got the immunotherapy had a 29% reduction in progression. And if they got both the immunotherapy and the PARP inhibitor, they got a 45% reduction in growth. And so reduction in basically progression or growth of the cancer. So you know, it's not perfect. These are tough situations, but we were able to see that this has really been a successful trial. And now, basically about 5 years from when we embarked on getting this trial up and running at Carbone, immunotherapy is now standard of care for women who face these cancers, because not just this trial, but a number of other trials have shown that it's been so successful. And it's, you know, it's just it's great to see something like this. It's great to share something like this. Judy's been a trooper. I didn't tell you a lot about the fine print, but this is, you know, treatment every month. And then after you finish the treatment, you stay on the treatment. And so she's now been on this trial for, what did we say, Judy, 3 years, maybe a little more than 3 years. So it's really quite remarkable. So I'm going to turn it over to Judy. I was going to show pictures of her tumor. I had some other ideas. And then I just realized, wow, this is just a journey. This is a journey, and she needs to tell everybody about what this has been like for her. I can just say on behalf of the other physicians, one of my colleagues, Dr. Spencer, enrolled her in the trial, and it's been his pleasure to work with her. Our clinical trials research staff have really enjoyed working with Judi, and she's just been kind of amazing, and we've been successful in keeping her cancer under control. So rather than me telling you about her journey, I'm going to turn it over to Judi. These were some of the pictures about journeys that worked for me, but I thought maybe it'd be better to hear it from her. So I'm going to take my slides away and turn it over to Judi.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dr. Hartenbach. I appreciate you saying all those wonderful things. I think the reason I wanted to talk to people is because a lot of you are working on clinical research. And I just kind of want to say thank you for doing it because it's important to people like me. One of the things that happened was I was a recurrent cancer. And originally I was told I had a very slim chance of getting cancer again because I was stage 1 and it was very early. But as I say to people, I'm very lucky. I have a lot of good luck and I have a lot of bad luck. I got bad luck with the reoccurrence. And the way it showed up in me was a tumor in my hip that was preventing me from walking normally. We thought I had a hip replacement there. We thought it might have been that hip replacement that was causing problems. And when I finally had so much pain and really couldn't walk, I was in a wheelchair. We did a check on the tumor, and it was devastating to find out that the cancer was back because the tumor was very large. So when I found that out, I did what every good cancer patient does. I got on Google, which probably wasn't a good idea because it told me that my rate of survival was anywhere from 3 months to a year, basically. So that was really scary for my wife and I. And we knew we needed to treat it. But I'd like to say it was 100% altruistic that I was looking at clinical trials. But it was also because I needed to find something that would maybe give me a better shot at survival than what I was reading on the internet. So we checked with some friends around the country who worked in the cancer field, and a lot of people were telling us about clinical trials and how friends had tried them and other people had tried them. So we went to UW and I started talking to Dr. Spencer about what was the possibility of me getting on a clinical trial and were there any. And he told me about 2 different trials. And the one that I ended up on, I got on after my wife and I talked about it because we felt like we had a 1 in 3 chance of getting something that might help prevent the cancer from growing. So that's how we ended up on this study. I also talked to him a lot about the fact that I had seen cancer research and I had seen how much in the last few years it had changed and how there were so many more things helping patients with cancer. And also, I talked about the fact that how women's cancer is typically behind on a lot of this stuff. And so there was a part of me that did want to move the research forward once we made that decision to go ahead and do this. Once we made that decision, then we found out kind of what we were in for in terms of filling out surveys monthly and coming in monthly for treatment and taking drugs and recording the exact times I'm taping them and doing all of that. And honestly, my wife and I sort of thought, well, maybe we'll have a year or 2 more. So whatever we get is what we get. We both think, and I've talked with Dr. Hartenbach about this, that I am getting both of the drugs, mostly because of side effects I've encountered. That or the placebo effect with side effects is really good in me. But I seem to be getting both sets of drugs, and it has stopped the cancer progression and allowed me to go on living. And my wife and I talked a lot about what that meant. And I guess when you get a big scare like we had, where we were told my time was going to be short, we put our retirement lives on the fast track. And I decided I needed to walk and move as well as I possibly could, even with the tumor. And the drugs did their part because the tumor size decreased. And that seemed to give me some more use of my leg back. So I'm happy to say I went from walking with a cane or walking using a wheelchair really when we started to being able to walk with a cane to now where I can walk a pretty good distance without anything. And for the travel we do, I use trekking poles, and then I can go about 2 miles without a problem. But I've been working on getting that back, but I've had the time to do it. And in the meantime, the good news is I keep sharing with Dr. Hartenbach, we have to rearrange my trials because my wife and I are taking trips. We've had a list of places we've wanted to go. So right away, we went to Greece and Turkey and saw that. And we went to Sweden. And we've been trying to do international travel or even going up to cabins up north as much as we can because we feel like the time we have, we don't know how much time it's going to be. And while everyone keeps saying to me, oh, everybody's like that, I kind of say, well, it's a little different with us because we have cancer that we know about, and we just don't know when it's going to come up again. So we have been doing as much as we possibly can, traveling as much as we can, making the research team rearrange their schedules around us, which they've been really nice at doing. And we're going to do it again in February and March. Sorry, not sorry, but sorry. So, we really have been grateful for the time that we have. And it's been pretty amazing for me. And I have to remember to go back and think how sick I was, because I was not well at all. And to now go where I am, taking a lot of exercise classes and doing stuff that I didn't think I was going to be doing. So it's been great in that regard. I think in terms of the clinical trial, it's been wonderful in one sense, because certainly it's given me my life, and I am grateful for that. But the other thing that my wife and I talk about is it has also reminded us monthly that I still am living with cancer. And we don't know when it's going to come back or if. But it's always a reminder. And we have some friends who have other forms of cancer who say to us, oh, I don't even think about it anymore. I bet you don't either. And I thought, yeah, I do. Every month I do. And then every 4 months or 3 months, we go in for quarterly scans. And that's the other thing we call in our house. We call it now scanxiety, because we're like, is it going to show up this round? We've gotten better with that. And Dr. Hartenbach and I have talked, and she said, I think you'll know it when it's back. So I'm going with that hopefully I'll feel a change. And we'll know it's back before it shows up on the scans. But it's a difficult thing that every few months, the night before, we talk about what if this is the one. But we try to keep it in perspective that we've had this much time, and it's something we didn't expect to have. And so we have to just be grateful for the time we've now been given. And people said to us too, well, did you think about, there were negative things that could happen with this? And I have, and we both said, yeah, but if I didn't do anything, we knew what that was going to be. So we kind of felt like we had to try something else. But that was kind of how we ended up in this. And the other thing is, I know people have asked me, what are the barriers to participate? And I think one of the things is that I'm retired, and I'm really lucky I'm retired in many ways. But I have the ability to come in once a month and give a day up to get my treatment and to see the staff. If I were working, I don't know that I would be able to do that every month, because it ends up being a day by the time we see the clinical staff and, we talk about how things are going, and then they give the orders to get the drugs mixed. It takes about 2 to 3 hours for the pharmacy to get me the drugs, and then I get an hour treatment. So we leave and get there at between, around 9 in the morning, but we don't get out until 3 or 4 in the afternoon. So that's a whole day that not everybody has the luxury of giving. And then along with the quarterly scans. And I have to say, I'm fortunate because I don't have kids, and I don't have anything like that. And I have a spouse who's very supportive of me doing it. But I think not everybody is that lucky. And certainly if I was working a minimum wage job or a lower paying job with 2 weeks of sick leave, I'm not sure I could really afford to do it. But I look at myself as being lucky that I could do it and have been able to do it and have been a participant. And it, to me, obviously, this has made a huge difference in that I truly did not believe I'd be here right now. We were planning for the worst. We made funeral plans. We did our wills. We were pretty sure things were not going to turn out so well. And I'm very happy now that to say that obviously it's 3.5 years later and it's going very well. So that's kind of my 2 cents on the participation end of things. And I guess I turn it back over to you, Dr. Hartenbach.
Yeah, thanks, Judy. Yeah, I mean, it definitely can take more effort for patients and for families. A lot of the clinical trials do require more visits and sometimes more rigorous treatments and more side effects. So we have to sort of weigh the risks and the benefits. One of the things that's true in our clinics is that our clinical research staff are so talented. And when you get on one of our cancer clinical trials, I think you get even more attention than patients who are in the office for more routine treatments, because these trials are really heavily regulated by the federal government. Whenever you're doing some kind of an interventional trial like that, an interventional trial like this, you know, that involves human subjects, we have a lot of safeguards in place to protect patients. And we also have a lot of rules and regulations and things that we need to do to make sure that what we're doing is safe. And we need to gather a lot of information. Judy talked about, you know, having to fill out reports and things. One of the things that I'm actually happy about is on our cancer clinical trials, we don't just measure on the CT scan how much the tumor is shrinking. We also ask the patient, how are you feeling? Because when you talk about having a 4-drug regimen instead of a 2-drug regimen, you know, wow, is that really worth it? Well, it turns out in this particular situation, the quality of life data, the information shows that people do tolerate these treatments pretty well, because these immunotherapy treatments and the PARP inhibitor treatments have less side effects than traditional chemotherapy. So targeted therapy is kind of the future of cancer, and you know, those are just a few more little details about Judy and her story. So I guess I'll ask Betsy Nugent if you have more questions for us. If there's something that we can help the audience with, we'd be happy to.
Yeah, it looks like there's a couple questions here. Tracy asked, first she said she wanted to thank Judy for sharing her story. And then her participation could be one of the reasons early stages have a higher survival rate. Could you give us stage 3 and 4 people some hope as far as research studies go?
Yeah, so Judy's study is for people who have either an advanced stage when they're first diagnosed, so stage 3 or stage 4 at the primary diagnosis, or have a recurrence. So so some of the patients have advanced cancer from the beginning, and some of them have metastatic cancer that has returned after stage 1. So Judy's trial is hope for patients with advanced stages, because those were those survival curves I was showing, that people have longer progression-free survival for advanced stages and metastatic.
Great. Thank you. Mabel asked Dr. Hartenbach, do you think this study would be unblinded in the end? And do you believe this regimen will be would possibly become standard of care in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. So arm B, the carboplatin, Taxol, and durvalumab, is now standard of care. So if you come into the office right now with an advanced uterine cancer, that's what every woman's going to get. The 4-drug regimen with the carboplatin, Taxol, durvalumab, and olaparib That is undergoing more studies, and that is not standard yet, but I suspect it may be. And one of the things they're doing with the hundreds of women on this particular trial is they're doing pre-arranged subset analysis to try and figure out who benefits the most from the 4-drug combination. And what they have found is that it's people who are what's called MMR proficient. So that group, this might become a standard. The MMR deficient group, the immunotherapy really alone is showing so much effectiveness. We may not use that 4-drug combination. So the 3-drug combination, arm B, is now standard. Arm C may become standard, but we need more research before we would suggest that.
And on these trials, will you unblind the patients if you're able to at the end of the study to let them know what they were on?
Yeah, my understanding is once the study is complete, so the life of a clinical trial is long, right? You get the study going, you get it approved at all the IRBs, obviously got to get your funding for it, and then you enroll. So the enrollment on this one was from February 2020 to sort of spring 2022, so about 2 years. It's still ongoing because patients like Judi are still getting this treatment. And then at the very end, once all the patients are off, then usually they will unblind. We will also unblind in situations where new data has come out that it would be advantageous for patients to be unblinded. We also can unblind people if they have progression and they're coming off the trial. We're able to unblind them so that we can know what they had, so we can make good treatment decisions for what they might need next. So there's lots of rules around blinding in these kinds of trials.
Great.
Always to advantage the patient. I mean, that's the other thing. I just want people who know to know when they go on a cancer clinical research trial. I think people sometimes think, oh, well, they're gonna research on me, they're gonna investigate, they're gonna experiment on me. But really what it is, it's all set up to try and deliver safe, effective care, and that we think is kind of really going to help the patient. So we're always going to make the decision based on what does the patient need and want, and patients can come off trials if it's not meeting their needs. But we're always set up to put the patient first and their experience first.
Great. Thank you so much. Judi, it looks like we have a question for you, if I can get to it.
Okay.
Judi, do you think the positive experience you have has changed the minds of your friends and family regarding clinical trials, and maybe they will now participate if they're eligible?
I definitely think it has. I've had nothing but good things to say about the clinical trial and my entire experience. And I think to kind of follow up on one thing Dr. Hartenbach said is the amount of care I have felt like I have gotten has been so high. Dr. Hartenbach can relate to this. I mean, I went in there and said, oh, I've got a little bit of a rash around my mouth. I don't know what it is. And whoom, I had clinicians in immediately checking me and, looking at it and trying to figure out what it was. And I was shocked by that. In fact, I hadn't reported it right away because I didn't think it was anything. But the level of care has been great. And I encourage everyone to get involved in clinical trials. I'm on a couple of Facebook group sites where people are talking about cancer and chemotherapy, and someone will post, I've been approached to do a clinical trial. Has anybody else? And I always tell them to go ahead and try it, talk to their provider about it, and then give it a shot and see what happens.
Great. There's a couple more for you, Judi.
Okay.
Did you know about clinical trials before you were diagnosed with cancer, or was this something you learned after your diagnosis? I know you said you did some research.
I had a brother-in-law who talked to me about a friend that he had who went to MD Anderson on a clinical trial and was involved with it. And I luckily have a large group of friends, and one of them lived in Houston and said, oh, a friend of mine is involved with clinical trials at MD Anderson. And so it really made me feel like, okay, this is a good thing to get involved with. And my brother-in-law was very encouraging, saying the guy went to MD Anderson on a clinical trial and was given, told not, did not have good news with his cancer. And yes, the cancer that he was trying in the clinical trial, the drugs really helped contain his cancer as well. So, and I have just been reading that cancer research had come so far. I thought, really, certainly there must be something by now that's going to be helpful.
That's great. Another one for you, Judi. Stephanie says, thank you for sharing, Judi. She's with the Institutional Review Board, the IRB, the office that reviews the protocol and study documents to ensure compliance with federal regulations. Is there anything you would have found useful in the informed consent form or process that wasn't there? And then she has a follow-up for that.
Yeah, not that I can think of. The only thing I could think of is that this would go, the information that this clinical trial could go on for quite a long time. And even if it was there for me at the time, it would have been wonderful news. So, oh boy, I get to participate for a long time. That's terrific. So I think everything was in there. We read through it and felt felt really confident in all of it. So not that I can think of.
Okay, because her other question was, did the process and form set you up with reasonable expectations for trial participation?
I think it did. It was a combination of that and talking with my clinician and the study coordinator, Wendy Beers, that really helped me. Because I'll be honest, to get all that information, it came in a ring binder about that thick. And we were still reeling from the news of your cancer is back. And so my wife read through a lot of it, and I read it, and it did not sink in. I mean, all I kept hearing is, 3 to 12 months, 3 to 12 months. And so it was very good to have a spouse there who was taking it in much better than I was at the time. That's what I would say.
That's great. Thank you, Judi. Dr. Hartenbach, a question for you. You mentioned a little bit that some patients do better on one treatment than another, and that sort of harkens to the area that we're coming into now of personalized medicine. How much is our clinical trials influencing the way you think about treating different individuals based on their individual, either genetic characteristics, the characteristics of their tumor, et cetera?
Let me make sure I'm unmuted. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, Betsy. Uterine cancer has really benefited from some information from the Genome Atlas project because a little over 10 years ago, as I said, all we had was carboplatin and Taxol. Now immunotherapy we know works, and now we know which subset it works in. So the TCGA studies, the Genome Atlas study that was done on uterine cancers across the country and published, I think it was 2011 or 2012. We now know there's kind of like 4 major types of uterine cancer that all have different molecular characteristics. So we are figuring out who needs more aggressive treatment. We're even starting to think that we can de-escalate treatment in some patients. We used to just have like a cookbook, like if you've got, advanced or recurrent uterine cancer, you get this one thing. Now it's very detailed on what are the particular markers that you have. I mentioned MMR status. There's also P53 mutation. There's a number of different, things that go into that umbrella of precision medicine. Like, we know the pathologists are telling us more, and our trials are very focused on particular populations based on the genomic evaluation of the tumor. So the short answer is a lot, and we could talk for hours.
That's great. I guess one thing, Judi, that we just would like to follow up with you on, you talked a little bit about sort of the burden of a clinical trial, that it can be very long days. And I think one of the things that we really struggle with in clinical trials is diverse participation. Can you talk a little bit about anything that you think we could do to really successfully attract and retain participants with greater diversity, because it's really important for us to understand about all different kinds of people and their experiences with things like cancer. And to be quite frank, we haven't done a fabulous job of that. So I'm interested in hearing some of your perspectives there.
Well, one of them would be to be able to change treatment to like evening hours if you're working during the day. Because as I said, if I was in a lower paid clerical job or just a lower paid job, period, taking a day off of work isn't something you can do easily because of that. And this is going to sound nuts, but after treatment, the last thing, I mean, as a woman, the last thing I'd want to do is come home and cook for my family. I know that sounds like a little thing, but it's kind of exhausting going through the care and then the treatment. And if I had children to come home to and have to cook and take care of them, I'd be like, you're crazy if you think I'm doing this clinical trial. And one of the things, my wife and I talk about is having food ready the day before for us to have it available. And I think some things like that would be, barriers to people from lower incomes or people from different ethnic backgrounds. And the other thing is that I think to make sure that it sort of is for everyone. One of the things that happened to me in the trial, and I'm a lesbian and I'm married, but in the questions, I'll be very frank, it said to me, have you had sex? Yes or no? If I hit yes, it said, was your intercourse painful? And I thought, what do I do with that? So I go back and say, well, do I say no and lie? So I reported that to the team and said, there's an assumption here that has to go away. And it was changed eventually. But I think it's things like that that really have to be watched for in the trials, because there are little cues that say, you don't belong here. And it's not okay. And like I said, the first time it happened, I sat there for a good 20 minutes going, what do I say to this? But I think, somebody who is very focused on diversity needs to go through some of that. And the other thing is, like I said, the manual, I know the IRB is necessary. I understand it. But that manual is real intimidating when you get it and you have a cancer diagnosis. It's like, oh my God, and I know you have to warn about everything going on, but it kind of scares the bejesus out of you when you get it. And so I think, like I said, asking people to have someone come with them that you can focus on, who maybe doesn't have the cancer, who can be the receptacle for a lot of that information, would really be good. But, a big barrier that I see, like I said, is work. Because if I were working, and had 2 weeks of vacation a year, 12 days, plus my scans, which are 4 more, that's 16 days that are used up with clinical trials. And that's a lot. If you only get 14 days of vacation and sick leave, maybe, that's a difficult ask. So that would be my thought on it.
Thanks, Judi. That's really helpful. I really appreciate your perspective there.
Mm-hmm.
Are there, I guess one more question for you, Ellen. If somebody has been diagnosed with cancer, how can they find out more about clinical trials? How would you advise they go about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually went ahead and Googled this to make sure it would work. You can Google UW Health Cancer Clinical Trials, and you will get right away a link to our UW Health website, which will then link you to, various cancer clinical trials that are available here, right? And in the other way is through the NIH site, which is a little harder. You need to know what type of cancer it is. You need to know the stage. You need to know some basic details of your cancer. But figuring out, whether we at UW Health have some clinical trial activity in a particular cancer site, you can kind of figure out even from the Googling. And we have clinical trial navigators in our cancer center. So if people inquire, if they say, hey, I want to get another opinion and I want to look into clinical trials, we have our clinical trial navigator gather the information to see, hey, do we have something that they'd be eligible for, whether it's phase 1, 2, or 3. And the NIH has a really detailed website about this, but you have to know a lot of details about your cancer to be able to do it. And just so everybody knows, the National Cancer Institute, which is part of the NIH, there is a very specific repository of every active clinical trial going on in the cancer space. So, this particular trial, this DUO-E trial, has a NCT number, of National Clinical Trials Registration number. So I think the bigger problem is that, when people start Googling this stuff, it can just be super confusing and hard for people to navigate. So that's why we have the clinical trial navigators at the Cancer Center.
Right. And then one last question, really for both of you. What are the next steps for Dr. Hartenbach and Judi in terms of this trial? Will it continue to go on, or are there additional trials that may be coming that Judi would be eligible?
Yeah. So this particular trial, participants can stay on this trial as long as they don't have disease progression. So somebody asked, advanced versus, stage 1. This trial is just for people who have either a recurrence of an early stage cancer or an advanced stage 3, stage 4. And the trial actually had kind of half in each group. And as long as the cancer is under control, and that means that it's staying either stable, not growing, or shrinking. So Judi's did a lot of shrinking. And that's why it was pushing on the nerve on her leg and making it hard for her to walk. It has reduced in size, dramatically. And she would be able to stay on the trial unless she had progression of her cancer or new side effects that were unbearable. So this trial is going to go on for a while.
Okay, great.
And to answer your other question, I think since we opened this trial and closed to accrual, I think we opened 3 or 4 other new uterine cancer trials that are targeting particular mutations. Remember, we talked about different mutations, so we have several other uterine cancer trials open. If Judi had progression, we would do a whole assessment again to see what she might be eligible for, or what standard treatments that she might be able to take.